The sheriff didn't even blink when I handed him the paperwork. "So, you're saying the HOA built that entire neighborhood on your land?" he asked, glancing out over the endless rows of identical luxury homes and 24 confused families watching from their manicured driveways. I nodded once, slid over the original land deed, and added, "And now they're charging me $600,000 to live here?" The sheriff laughed, signed the last page, and pinned a notice to the HOA's front gate. It read, "This entire development is now under new ownership." Their faces were priceless. Karen screamed, "A guy named Brent fainted, and I just sipped my coffee on horseback and asked myself the same question I'm asking you. What kind of idiots build a mansion village on a 20-acre private ranch without checking who owns the land?" It started with a red flag. Literally, a little red nylon flag poking up from the ground like a paper-cut warning, staked into a corner of the property I hadn't checked in a few months. My ranch sprawls across 20 acres of rough, wild land, oak groves, creek beds, rocky ridgelines, and prairie that rolls all the way to the sky. You don't notice every pebble on a spread that big, and I'll admit, that far corner wasn't exactly high traffic. But that flag caught my eye while I was fixing a broken latch on a livestock gate about a mile from the eastern fence line. At first, I assumed it was some utility marker. Maybe the electric company laying new underground lines. But a week later, I saw another. Blue this time, about 100 yards west of the first one. Then orange. Then white. Within a month, there were stakes everywhere, color-coded and numbered, forming weird grids and curves like some kind of patchwork crop circle laid out by obsessive aliens. I shrugged it off until I saw the orange paint. Neon spray can stripe slicing through dirt and rock, marking paths I hadn't authorized across soil I inherited from my grandfather and swore to protect. That's when I started paying attention. The first truck came through just before dawn one Friday. I heard it before I saw it, diesel grumble loud enough to spook the horses. I saddled up and rode east, figuring it was some lost county worker. Instead, I found a gravel truck offloading onto what used to be a deer trail. The driver waved like we were neighbors. No badge, no county insignia, just a logo I didn't recognize, Pinnacle Horizon Group, slapped on the door in sleek, modern lettering. He seemed confused when I asked what he was doing. "Road Foundation," he said like that, explained everything. "Oh, Phase 1. I blinked. "Oh, what?" He didn't know much more. Just a job ticket, coordinates, and a schedule. I told him he was on private land. He laughed like I was joking. "This is Community Development Parcel E. Says so right here." He showed me a clipboard with satellite imagery that looked vaguely like my pasture, only overlaid with streets, houses, and a planned clubhouse with a tennis court. I rode back in a daze, heart thudding like hooves in mud. By the next week, bulldozers had arrived. They flattened the land like it owed them money. They shaved off the topsoil I'd worked years to preserve, tore down mesquite stands that shaded the deer in summer, and carved straight lines through the brush like God had hired a civil engineer. I watched from the ridge, hands clenched around my binoculars, feeling like a ghost on my own land. One night, I followed their taillights to a temporary trailer labeled Site Office. The guy inside had city teeth, cologne thick enough to bite, and a Bluetooth earpiece glued to his skull like a cyborg. I asked him who gave permission to build here. He barely looked up. "All approved, friend. Talk to the HOA. He said it like it was a magic word, like it absolved them of everything. I told him again this was my land. He raised an eyebrow, tapped his iPad, and said, "This is parcel 338B, part of Willow Creek Heights. I don't see your name anywhere." I nearly flipped the desk. Instead, I asked to see the permit. He showed me a set of scanned PDFs stamped with what looked like county signatures. I took photos. Then I rode home and pulled my deed. I don't trust digital. I keep things printed, stamped, notarized, triple locked. My deed, recorded and filed in 3 counties because the boundaries stretched that far, showed my ownership in black and white. Survey coordinates, historical title tracing back to 1892, mineral rights, grazing rights, everything. My land, my name, no subdivisions, no parcels for development. Nothing ever sold. I called the county recorder's office. They said no public hearings had been held, no zoning changes, no eminent domain claims, nothing. It didn't make sense. Yet the machines kept coming. Foundations were poured like Judgment Day. Lumber stacks became frames. Frames became rooftops. Within 6 weeks, there were houses dotting my ridgeline. Identical boxes with fake stone facades, solar panels, and 2 car garages. I drove out of my old Ford and parked in front of one of the new builds. A woman in yoga pants stepped out holding a dog the size of a slipper. "Oh, hi," she chirped. "Are you the groundskeeper?" I stared at her. She smiled wider. The HOA said someone was maintaining the trails. Can I just say, this land is so peaceful. It's like living inside a nature preserve. I wanted to scream. Instead, I turned around and left before I said something I couldn't unsay. By the second month, mail started arriving for Willow Creek Heights HOA, not to a P.O. box, to my ranch address. 1 envelope, then 20, then bins, welcome packets, HOA newsletters. A glossy pamphlet congratulating future residents of an innovative, sustainable luxury lifestyle community in the heart of Texas ranchland. My address, their dream. I called every number listed. Most went to voicemail. One lady answered and put me on hold so long I started counting fence posts. When she came back, I told her I was the legal owner of the property. She sounded surprised, then cold. "If you're not an approved member of Willow Creek Heights," she said, "you'll need to speak with our legal team. We do not authorize outside access during Phase 1. I asked her what planet she thought she lived on. She hung up. The final straw came when they put up a sign, right in front of my cattle pond. A big white plastic thing bolted into the ground, with a logo of a willow tree and a tagline that said, "Willow Creek Heights, where community and nature meet in harmony." I ripped it out with my bare hands and tossed it in the bed of my truck. That afternoon, 2 men in polo shirts and khakis came to my gate with clipboards. One had a little lapel pin shaped like a house. "Sir," the shorter one began, "we're with the compliance team. There's been a report of unauthorized signage removal and non-compliant fencing along parcel perimeter 3. I blinked. "The parcel perimeter that's mine?" They ignored that. "The HOA bylaws require aesthetic conformity. You'll be assessed a fine for damage to communal property. Also, livestock must be approved and penned according to HOA code." I stepped out of the truck, boots crunching gravel. They stepped back. I didn't say a word, just stared. After a moment, they got back in their car and drove off. That night, I sat on the porch, rifle across my lap, bourbon in hand, and silence all around. Except it wasn't real silence. It was the hum of new streetlights a mile away. The thump of bass from a backyard party that didn't belong. The flicker of someone else's motion sensor lights where coyotes used to roam. The land felt bruised, like it had been manhandled by people who thought the soil was just a backdrop for their lifestyle branding. I didn't sleep. I just listened to the wind pushing through barbed wire that was no longer mine alone. The next morning, I found my fence cut in 3 places. Clean slices, like someone used bolt cutters. A construction crew was parked just beyond, pouring a concrete sidewalk right through a trail my grandfather had carved for his cattle 70 years ago. I walked up, calm, asked them who gave permission. One of them, young guy, probably 22, shrugged and said,
"We just go where the site map says. I asked to see the map."
It was printed on glossy paper with blue lines, red lots, and little green patches labeled Future Dog Park, Community Garden, and Heritage Grove. The Heritage Grove sat exactly where I'd buried my first dog. I asked him if he knew what a land survey was. He didn't. I asked if anyone had checked the actual title ownership. He just stared at me. I nodded, thanked him, and left. I drove straight to the county clerk's office, marched up to the front desk, asked to speak with someone about property violations. The lady behind the desk looked nervous, then handed me a business card for a development liaison. I called the number. No answer. Left a message. Called again. Nothing. 2 days later, I received a certified letter from Willow Creek Heights HOA titled, Notice of Noncompliance and Fine Structure. Inside, they outlined 7 violations I'd supposedly committed. Grazing unregistered livestock, maintaining a non-conforming outbuilding, unauthorized use of trails, and, my favorite, failure to submit architectural plans for existing residents, my ranch house. Built by my great-grandfather. They fined me $612,348, payable within 30 days. That was the moment I realized something bigger was happening, something deliberate. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't ignorance. This was a land grab wrapped in paperwork, masked in legalese, disguised as community development. They were carving up my history with bulldozers and calling it progress. They thought they bought a dream. They didn't realize they were trespassing on something far more dangerous than land. They were trespassing on me. The envelope came certified, signature required. Thick, glossy, legal-grade paper. Like it had weight, not just in ounces, but in consequences. No return address, just a gold-embossed seal of a willow tree, and the words, Willow Creek Heights Residential Compliance Division. I knew the game before I opened it, but knowing doesn't lessen the blow. I sat on my porch, coffee going cold in my hand, and tore it open with a knife older than half the people living in that HOA circus. The letter inside was 4 pages long and so thick with bureaucratic language you could smell the arrogance through the ink. Dear resident, it began, not even acknowledging my name or title, just resident, like I'd become some generic squatter on my own property. This communication serves as formal notification of delinquent dues, assessments, and fines, totaling $612,348.22, incurred for continued non-compliance with Willow Creek Heights community standards. I blinked. Read it again, then read it out loud like maybe the numbers would sound more sane coming off my tongue. But no, there it was, over $600,000 in imaginary debt, for the crime of existing in a place that belonged to me long before their subdivision fantasy ever broke ground. I read further. My horse trails were now labeled unauthorized usage of communal access roads. My barn, weathered, sturdy, hand-built by my father, was cited for nonconformity to approved architectural harmony protocols. My livestock, 30 head of cattle and a few rescue donkeys, were aesthetic disruptors and unsanctioned agricultural operations. I'd apparently been warned 3 times, they claimed, which was fascinating because I'd received exactly 0 warnings. 0 notifications, 0 phone calls, not a knock, not a whisper. Just this 4-page ransom note with a due date, a threat of legal escalation, and a QR code for easy online payment. I'd have laughed if the fury hadn't sat like a fist in my chest. The next day, I rode Old Buck down the South Trail to clear my head. He's a quiet gelding, calm and steady, one of those animals that seems to absorb whatever storm's churning in your gut. We passed under the ridge by what used to be a cattle gate, now replaced with a fresh slab of concrete and a road sign that read Sycamore Bend Lane. I shook my head. That name didn't even make sense. There are no sycamores within 10 miles. But before I could finish scoffing, a golf cart pulled up beside me, buzzing like a bug on lithium. A man in a yellow vest, maybe late 20s, all clipboard and swagger, waved at me with forced politeness. "Sir, you're in violation of HOA riding regulations," he said, gesturing toward Buck like he was a monster instead of the gentlest horse on the property. I stared at him. "This is my land," I said flatly. He didn't blink. "This is Willow Creek Heights community property. Equestrian activity is only allowed on pre-approved routes and only between the hours of 10 a.m. and 4 p.m. I looked at my watch. 9:52. "You gonna fine me for 8 minutes early?" I asked. He scribbled something on his pad. "I'll be submitting this to the board." By the end of the week, I'd received 3 more notices. One was for unauthorized structure, referencing the smokehouse I'd been curing meat in since 2003. Another was for light pollution from the sodium lamp over my well pump. And the last, my personal favorite, was a cease and desist regarding my morning rooster. "Persistent crowing before 7 a.m. disrupts residential peace," it read. They'd even cited me under a clause titled Acoustic Uniformity, My blood pressure spiked so hard I thought I felt my eyelid twitch. I drove down to the county zoning office in person, spoke to a man with too much cologne, and not enough answers. He pulled up something on his screen, frowned, then told me the area had been rezoned for mixed-use development last year. I asked who filed the motion. He clicked a few things, then shrugged. Says here it was submitted by a planning consortium under Pinnacle Horizon Development Group. Looks like they acquired provisional development rights through an emergency rural reinvestment ordinance. I asked when the hearing was. He squinted. You didn't attend the consultation? I leaned in. There was no consultation. He waved me off. Public notices were posted. I demanded to know where. He sighed, opened a folder, and showed me a photocopy of a single yellow flyer stapled to a utility pole 12 miles from my house, dated 6 months ago. I'd been out on a cattle run in Utah that entire week. Back home, a fresh notice was taped to my gate. This one was bright orange and written in bold font like a bad movie poster. Final warning, non-compliance subject to enforcement action. It listed an itemized breakdown of all my infractions, including a new one, failure to submit landscaping plans for native growth zones. Apparently, wild bluebonnets are no longer up to code. I called the number at the bottom. A receptionist answered with a script so robotic she might have been AI. I told her who I was. Her tone changed. "Oh," she said, clicking keys. "You're the one refusing to cooperate." I bit my tongue. Asked for someone in charge. She transferred me. A man picked up and introduced himself as Gregory, compliance director. His voice had that oily calm, like a guy who eats policy for breakfast. I told him the fines were illegal, that the land wasn't theirs, that no transfer had occurred. He chuckled. According to our filings, your land is now within the Willow Creek Heights development overlay. You were unreachable during the public notice period, so the zoning board granted default inclusion. If you have issues, I recommend consulting your attorney. Then he hung up. 2 days later, a drone buzzed low over my property line. Not a toy. A surveillance-grade quadcopter with a 4K camera and a blinking red light. I watched it circle my livestock pen, zoom in on my tool shed, then drift up toward the house like it was casing the joint. I raised my rifle, tracked it for 10 seconds, then thought better of it. Let them record. Let them see what happens when you try to bully a man off the land his blood is buried in. They weren't just trying to fine me into submission. They were trying to erase me, turn me into a trespasser on the dirt that built my family. It was gaslighting on a scale I hadn't thought possible. Every interaction was upside down. My barn wasn't a barn. My trails weren't trails. My address wasn't valid. My ownership was being treated like a suggestion. I even got a letter from a mortgage servicer trying to verify my home's escrow account, because they'd flagged it as a structure built without HOA loan approval. My house, built in 1946. Fully paid off before some of these developers were even born. One morning, I woke up to find a white SUV parked just beyond the ridge, branded with the HOA logo and the phrase, Community Compliance Patrol. A man and a woman stepped out in khakis and matching polos. They didn't knock. They walked the perimeter, making notes, taking pictures. I stood on my porch with a thermos and a sidearm on my hip. They looked up once, didn't wave, then climbed back in and drove off like spies retreating from foreign soil. That night, I found a flyer in my mailbox, though I don't recall authorizing mail delivery through their network. You're invited. Willow Creek Heights monthly resident meeting. All property members expected to attend. Property members, not owners, members. Like I joined a club by accident and now owed dues to a bunch of suburban pirates. I nearly tore it in half. But instead, I circled the date. Because it was time they saw my face. It was time they learned whose name was still on the land. They'd tried to erase me with bylaws and barcodes, but they forgot the one rule you don't break out here: don't mess with a rancher's land. Especially not one who's got the paper trail, the firepower, and the resolve to burn your whole operation to the ground, one citation at a time. It's one thing to be harassed. It's another to be erased. But the moment they told me I didn't exist on my own land, I knew I wasn't just dealing with a rogue HOA, I was up against a machine. And machines break in one of two ways. You jam up their gears, or you rip out their wiring. I planned to do both. I hadn't spoken to Elliot in 4 years, not since he'd moved to D.C. to work for the Bureau of Federal Land Management. But when I left him a voicemail that ended with, "They built 400 homes on my land and think I owe them money," he called back in under 10 minutes. "Send coordinates," he said, "and make sure the coffee's strong. I'm driving down." He pulled up in a gray rental 2 days later, stepping out with a laptop bag, a battered GPS rig, and an attitude like he just smelled a lie from 3 states away. "You weren't kidding," he said, eyeing the line of newly finished homes glittering along my eastern ridge like ticks on a dog. "Hell of a problem you've got." I handed him a mug. "Nah," I said. "They've got the problem. I've just got the land." We set up a mobile command post in my barn, folding tables, generator, whiteboard, and enough black coffee to keep a SEAL team awake through a storm. Elliot dove into records like a man digging through rubble. He started with property maps, real ones, not the HOA's toddler crayon versions, and pulled county plat sheets from 1983, 1991, and 2004. Every map told the same story. The land was whole, untouched, never subdivided, never sold. "Your ranch," he said, pointing to the old deeds lined up across the table, "is still legally one giant piece of Texas. These punks built a fantasy city on top of it like kids playing Sim City." I asked how it was possible, how a development group could break ground on my soil without triggering a legal alarm. That's when Elliot smirked. "Because they used magic," he said. "The kind that runs on bribes and bureaucracy." He pulled up emails from the County Planning Commission, obtained through a quiet FOIA request he filed before he'd even left D.C. The language was shady. Vague meeting minutes, votes approved, by proxy, one commissioner regrettably absent during the most critical approval vote. "Pinnacle Horizon Group," Elliot muttered. "These guys are like termites in suits. They submit 10 development requests a year, get 5 approved, and pay off whoever needs a new boat." We found a proposal listed under an LLC called Tranquil Terrain Holdings. Their address? A strip mall mailbox in Phoenix. Their CEO? A man named Scott R. Lancer, also a board member of Pinnacle Horizon. And guess who filed the rezoning request that covered my eastern pastures? Lancer. Using GPS coordinates that just barely ducked under the radar of the neighboring county line. "This isn't incompetence," Elliot said. "It's calculated theft." Then we found the blueprints, digitally logged in the county planning portal but buried under 19 layers of redirects, mislabeled PDFs, and decoy documents. They called it Willow Creek Heights, Phases IV. Elliot pulled up the satellite overlay and dropped it onto a live terrain map of my ranch. The screen lit up like a Christmas tree. "Phase I through 4 already built," he said, tapping his stylus. "That's 407 lots. 1 clubhouse, 2 artificial lakes, a rec center, and a private preserve that's literally your deer blind." I clenched my jaw. "And Phase V? Set to break ground next spring, right in the middle of your hayfields." I didn't speak for a moment, just stared at the glowing grid of fake civilization superimposed onto the legacy of 3 generations of sweat, cattle, and soil. Then Elliot zoomed out. "And now here's the kicker," he said. He turned on the deed boundaries from the Bureau's own archive. A thick green box blinked into view. It surrounded everything, every phase, every street, every eco-home with its rain barrel and quartz countertops. "They built all of it," Elliot said slowly. "Without realizing it still falls under your single unbroken deed. They never filed for subdivision. They just forged permission and assumed nobody would check." I felt the air change in my lungs. That kind of anger isn't loud. It's cold, still, like the sky before a tornado. They hadn't stolen a slice. They'd stolen 400 acres, and they'd done it with PowerPoints and bribes, betting I'd either roll over or get buried in paperwork. But there's something they didn't count on. I may be a rancher now, but before I took over the family land, I was a federal systems contractor. I built forensic auditing platforms for the same government they tried to bamboozle. I wrote the software that catches land title fraud. And the one guy who knew how to run it better than me was standing across from me in boots, grinning like a wolf who just sniffed blood. We dug deeper. Elliot tracked down a whistleblower buried in the planning office, a clerk who'd been quietly sidelined after raising red flags about the rezoning vote. She forwarded us internal memos. One had the subject line, "Do not contact ranch owner. He's listed as non-responsive." Attached was a copy of a returned mail envelope they'd forged with a rubber stamp, claiming I'd ignored notification attempts. The address they mailed it to? A P.O. box I haven't used in 15 years. They built an entire subdivision on a lie, Elliot said. And the HOA president has no clue she's living in the middle of a legal hornet's nest. Karen, that was her name. Karen Dubose, HOA president, real estate influencer, and self-appointed queen of manicured suburbia. We looked her up. She'd given a TEDx talk called The Power of Community Branding, wore pastel blazers, and hosted Zoom webinars about transformational neighborhood living. Her bio bragged about closing over $15 million in home sales. She had no legal background, no title experience. She was just the face, but her name was on every piece of HOA correspondence. And, according to county filings, she had signed the original site usage acknowledgement as the community's designated land representative. She swore under oath that this land was developer-owned, Elliot said, pointing at her signature. Which means she just committed a felony, I whistled. That's one hell of a yoga class she's gonna miss. We built a binder. Every page annotated, cross-referenced, and flagged. We printed satellite overlays, land deed scans, zoning inconsistencies, time-stamped drone footage of their construction phases, and 24 examples of fraudulent filings. Elliot even pulled historic satellite photos from the National Archives to prove that the land hadn't been cleared until after the rezoning date. We had them boxed in. The homes may have looked like paradise to their buyers, but in legal terms, they were castles built on sand. Every nail, every stone, every lawn gnome, all illegally perched atop land that was never theirs to claim. I asked Elliot what would happen if we took this to court. He leaned back, arms crossed. Worst case, it's a titling nightmare for them. Best case, you could file for quiet title and take legal ownership of every structure on your land. All 407 houses. I stared at him. You're saying I could own their homes? He nodded slowly. Legally, yes. Morally? Depends how pissed off you are. I didn't answer. Just stood up, walked to the barn doors, and stared out at the glittering skyline of McMansions squatting on my pasture. I could see Karen's house from here, bigger than the others, perched on the highest ridge, with solar panels and a koi pond visible from Google Earth. She's sitting in my east pasture, I said, right where my granddad used to set up his fire pit every fall. Elliot joined me at the door. "Wanna knock?" he asked. I shook my head. Not yet. Instead, we decided to let the pressure build. Let the HOA keep their game going a little longer, unaware that every HOA meeting, every letter, every fine was digging their grave deeper. I wanted them comfortable. I wanted Karen smug and arrogant, still sipping her cucumber water and rehearsing speeches about community excellence, while her entire empire sat on a legal fault line ready to crack. Because when we struck, it wouldn't be a lawsuit. It would be an invasion. And not one house in that glossy, arrogant neighborhood would be safe from the truth I now held in my hands. They thought they owned this land, but they were living in my living room, and I was about to evict every last one of them with paperwork sharp enough to cut down mountains. Retaliation isn't always loud. Sometimes it's a slow turn of the screw, one creaking inch at a time, until the pressure becomes unbearable and the mask finally splits. That's exactly what I did. I had everything I needed: the deeds, the satellite overlays, the forged permits, the signatures that didn't belong to anyone with legal standing. But going scorched earth right away would have been too easy. No, I wanted them to sweat, to second guess, to unravel from the inside while thinking they were still in control. So, I started small, strategic, subtle. The first move was fencing, nothing aggressive, just boundary clarification. I began by sectioning off the Northern Ridge Trail, the one they called Larkspur Scenic Path in their HOA map. That trail had been a cattle run since 1948, and it cut right through the center of their so-called Phase 3. One morning, I set up 5-strand barbed wire along its entire length. No warning, no explanation, just a brand new barrier with 2 padlocked gates and a steel sign that read, "Private property, entry by permit only." The next day, I got a letter from the HOA's Outdoor Amenities Committee, demanding Groton restore access to community trails per resident entitlement. I didn't reply. Instead, I posted a larger sign at both trail entrances. This time, it was in federal blue. Under federal property review. Do not disturb. That phrase was Elliot's idea. Official sounding. Vague enough to rattle them. And it worked. Within 72 hours, 4 homeowners contacted the HOA asking if the land was under investigation. One emailed me directly, politely requesting temporary access for a family nature walk. I responded with a simple template letter. You are currently residing on property under dispute. Trespassers will be documented and referred to the appropriate jurisdiction. I didn't even need to name the jurisdiction. Their imaginations filled in the blanks. Meanwhile, I started submitting cease and desist letters, one for every HOA fine they issued, one for every mailed threat, one for the construction of their second rec center, which they proudly announced in their July newsletter as a new outdoor fitness experience. I flagged it as unpermitted development on contested soil and forwarded the notice to their architectural vendor and the HOA board. The construction paused 2 days later. No official explanation, just cold feet. I knew the rhythm of fear when I saw it. Then I went deeper. I bought the adjacent 300-acre parcel to the west of Willow Creek Heights under an LLC I named Tranquil Heritage Management. Elliot helped set it up. The name was a calculated jab, a ghost echo of their original shell company, Tranquil Terrain Holdings. They didn't notice at first. Why would they? The land was empty scrub and brush. But within a week, I installed 10 motion-triggered trail cameras with wide-angle night vision, all pointed inward toward the community center. I mounted them on high brush poles with solar rigs, hidden just well enough to spook anyone who caught a glimpse. Then I started mailing select screenshots anonymously. Pictures of late-night golf cart rides. HOA members walking their dogs off-leash. Teenagers tagging fences. Each envelope simply said, "Activity logged. Timestamp recorded. Review pending." Karen felt it first. You could see it in her eyes during the HOA's August newsletter video. Her voice had that tight, plastic tone of someone trying to hold it together while the floor shifted beneath her feet. "We understand there's been some confusion about property lines," she said, smiling too wide. "Rest assured, the HOA is working closely with county officials to clarify zoning concerns and ensure all amenities remain accessible." Her eyes, though, betrayed her. They darted to the teleprompter too often, blinked too fast, rumors started to bloom. Elliot and I created fake Reddit accounts and dropped just enough breadcrumbs in local threads to stir the pot. "Anyone else hear about the ranch owner reclaiming half the development?" one post read. Another. "Heard from a friend at the mortgage office that title insurance is being reviewed. No one knows who really owns the land." It spread faster than I expected. Panic always does when people realize their 700 forever home might be built on borrowed dirt. Mortgage brokers started calling the HOA. Then the banks. One by one, homeowners began to whisper in driveways, their smiles tight, their walks brisk. Several reached out to me quietly, asking what was really going on. I told them the truth, but only part of it. "There may be issues with the original land titles," I said. "I'd recommend reviewing your paperwork and speaking with your legal counsel." The phrase, "clouded title," popped up in several group chats. I know, because Elliot hacked the unprotected HOA Facebook group and forwarded screenshots to me nightly like a bedtime story. My favorite was from a resident named Deborah who wrote, "Karen better fix this. I didn't pay HOA fees for 3 years just to live on a lawsuit." Karen held her first emergency meeting in mid-September. It was billed as a community alignment session, which is HOA speak for don't panic, but definitely panic. I showed up in person. No hat, no sunglasses, just a clean shirt, a leather folder, and boots that still carried dust from my cattle pens. I signed in under my full name and sat in the back row. The room was packed. Folding chairs filled the community center's great hall, beneath a chandelier that looked like it was stolen from a wedding catalog. Karen took the podium, flanked by two men in navy suits and tight expressions. "We appreciate everyone's attendance," she began. "There have been some rumors regarding land boundaries, title concerns, and development zoning. We're here to clarify that these are baseless and will be resolved through appropriate legal channels." I raised my hand. "Could you elaborate on which legal channels you're referring to?" The room shifted. Karen squinted at me, unsure if she'd heard correctly. "Excuse me," she began. "I'm Ellis Rollins," I said, standing up. "Owner of the land you're currently sitting on." The silence that followed felt like an orchestra cutting to static. You could feel the collective breath being held, strained and tight. Karen froze. One of the suit-wearing men whispered something into her ear. She smiled tightly. "Mr. Rollins, while we understand your concerns, this is a meeting for HOA members. And I'm here to remind you that your HOA might be illegally administering land that was never transferred, never subdivided, and currently sits inside my federally recorded deed, which I've brought copies of for your review." I pulled the folder from under my arm and set it gently on the table beside the podium. Karen didn't touch it. One of the suits did, reluctantly. He opened the first page, and his eyebrows rose. The whispering started almost instantly. People leaned over to their neighbors. Phones came out. Pictures were taken. Karen's voice wavered as she tried to redirect, but it was too late. The truth was in the room now. Not blaring like a siren, but humming like a chainsaw someone just primed for ignition. I stayed for the whole meeting, took notes, smiled when appropriate, spoke only once more to offer a suggestion. "You may want to consult your insurers. Title disputes like this have a way of impacting mortgage validity." Karen didn't speak to me again. Her eyes stayed glued to the papers. When I left, a man followed me to the parking lot. Middle-aged, khakis, breath that smelled like guilt. "Are you really the owner?" he asked. I nodded. "Then what happens next?" I met his gaze. "Next," I said, "we finish what they started, but we do it my way." Then I drove home, back across the invisible border between illusion and ownership, already planning the final strike. Because this wasn't about fences anymore. It was about reckoning. And every HOA officer, every smug bureaucrat who'd signed off on this theft, was about to learn what happens when you build your kingdom on another man's land and forget to knock. The morning of the summer gala broke hot and bright, like the sun had been summoned just to spotlight the end of an illusion. Willow Creek Heights had gone all out. White tents rose like royal pavilions over stolen land, garlands wrapped around lampposts that hadn't existed a year ago, and folding chairs lined up with military precision around a temporary stage erected at the heart of the community's celebration green. A jazz quartet was tuning up under the welcome banner. Food trucks ringed the area, serving overpriced sliders and avocado mocktails. It was supposed to be the crowning jewel of Karen's suburban empire, a televised event with local media coverage and 3 real estate influencers live streaming in real time. Instead, it became the setting for her downfall. I arrived just after noon, horseback, wearing a clean button-down, jeans, and the same boots I wore the day I buried my father. Behind me came 2 trucks. One carried the sheriff and 2 deputies, the other, a mobile legal office in a trailer with 2 state-certified attorneys and a court representative from the district judge's office. Elliot had coordinated everything with brutal precision. A third vehicle, unmarked but humming with electronics, brought the drone team, documenting the event in 4K from 3 angles. I tied off my horse near the clubhouse parking lot, adjusted my collar, and walked through the festival crowd like Moses parting a sea of confused stares and forced smiles. Karen was on stage, laughing too loudly with a councilman and a TV reporter when she saw me. Her expression froze, just a flicker, and she turned quickly back to the camera. Too late. I walked straight to the stage steps and climbed up as the music faltered. The MC, a young man in pastel linen, stepped toward me. "Sir, this is a residence only. I am the landowner," I said, projecting my voice across the crowd. "And this event is being held on private property." "My private property," murmurs began. People turned from their mini hot dogs and sparkling cucumber cups. The sheriff stepped forward and unzipped a leather folder, holding it high. "Under authorization from the District Court of Brazos County," he said, "this development, its structures, and any activity within the perimeter of GPS Zone 107E through 117B are hereby declared to exist within the unsubdivided land parcel lawfully owned by Ellis Rollins." Karen dropped her champagne flute. The drone buzzed overhead as the crowd went silent. My attorney stepped up beside me and activated a Bluetooth speaker. A calm voice echoed from the stage. "Dr. Ruben Letts, land surveyor, joining us via Zoom. Based on my field evaluation, satellite overlays, and GPS cross-confirmation with County Plat Archives," he said, "there is a 98.7% overlap between the Willow Creek Heights development and the parcel designated Rollins Ranch, Title 83,204B. The land was never subdivided. All construction was conducted without permission from the legal landowner." Karen tried to cut in. "This is ridiculous. We had permits." "Forged," said the sheriff. "All verified by the state attorney's office. We have multiple affidavits and a whistleblower account." One of the deputies began handing out documents to the homeowners gathered near the front. "Notice of title conflict and pending quiet title judgment." I watched as paper met palm, one by one, and the color drained from each face. The same people who once sneered at my boots now looked at me like I was a ghost come to collect. Karen's voice cracked. "You can't just take people's homes." I turned to her. "I didn't take them. Your developer did. You lied. You misrepresented the land. You signed a land usage certificate under penalty of perjury." My attorney held up another set of documents. "Karen Dubose, you are hereby served with a civil fraud lawsuit seeking damages for unlawful administration of property, personal enrichment through misrepresented authority, and willful obstruction of land ownership rights." "This is my life's work," she cried, shaking. "And this was my family's land for 3 generations, I replied coldly. "The difference is I have the paperwork." The judge's order had come through that morning. It granted me quiet title, a full and final legal claim to every structure built atop my deeded land. The homes, the roads, the clubhouse, the sidewalks, even the damn koi pond, all mine. It took 2 more hours for my legal team to distribute formal ownership transfer notices. Some homeowners wept. Others cursed. A few tried to rally against me, calling me a land thief, a heartless cowboy, a vulture. I let them scream. I'd offered them more due process than I ever got. And besides, the truth was already public. The press had arrived by then. 3 local news vans, 1 national crew, and a real estate podcast personality named Ryan, who live-streamed the whole thing to 50,000 followers. "This is unprecedented," he said breathlessly. Phone pointed at the chaos behind him. "An entire community just lost their titles to the man who legally owns the soil under their foundations." I gave the residents 2 options. 1, leave. No hard feelings, no trespassing suits. They had 30 days to vacate, and I'd eat the legal costs. Or 2, stay, and start paying me rent under newly filed property leases. I capped their monthly rate below market value, not out of mercy, but out of strategy. I wanted stability, the press, the paperwork, and the poetic justice of converting an illegal HOA into a legal landlord operation where I called the shots. A lot of them stayed. They grumbled, sure, but they stayed. Because people like that fear disruption more than they love pride. They'd rather write checks than admit they were wrong. The ones who left did so quietly. Their homes were empty for less than a week. I put them up for auction under Ellis Ranch Holdings LLC, and the bidding wars got nasty. Real estate agents practically begged for listings. One even tried to get me to partner on a new development. I declined. Karen, she didn't just lose her title. She lost her license. The state real estate board issued a formal review, and under pressure from public backlash, she was permanently barred from handling any property transactions in the state of Texas. Her influencer deals dried up. Her webinars were canceled. Her social media accounts went dark. The last time I saw her, she was standing on the curb in front of her McMansion with a single suitcase, waiting for a rideshare that never came. I didn't say a word, just nodded once. She looked away. By fall, I'd rebranded the neighborhood. New signs went up, wooden, sandblasted, no gold leaf. They read, "Welcome to Ellis Ranch Estates, HOA free since 2025. Underneath that, in smaller print, "Land built by family. Community built by truth." I kept the community garden, planted real wildflowers in it this time. Let the bluebonnets grow tall. I turned the clubhouse into a memorial and opened it up to public land rights education. We run workshops now, taught by me, Elliot, and a few guest attorneys about title fraud, zoning law, and how to never get screwed by a suburban kleptocracy again. Sometimes, I ride buck through the newly renamed Ellis Ridge Trail, what used to be Sycamore Bend. People wave now, some offer coffee, a few still won't look me in the eye. That's fine. I'm not here for forgiveness. I'm here because the land remembers, and it needed someone to speak for it. I was that someone. I still am. And every time I pass the old HOA board building, now a utility shed with a broken mailbox, I tip my hat, not to honor them, but to mark the grave of their arrogance, because that's where it died. On my land, in full view of the world, permanently evicted, quietly owned, forever mine.